Hey all, today we're going to do a little bit of square roots review, and this is going to help us with our special right triangles. So we'll go back and we'll do a little bit more work with the special right triangles after we take care of a little bit of square roots review. So maybe this will simplify things for you. That's what I hope. First thing we need to recall from previous math classes is how we can handle multiplying and dividing things that are underneath square root symbols. So here I have two square roots. They're not the same, and these two parentheses next to each other imply that we're going to multiply square root of 3, square root of 2. And instead of saying square root, I'm going to often say root. It's just easier to say. So if I want to multiply two roots, I can just multiply the numbers that are underneath the symbol. So 3 times 2 gives me 6, and then I keep that underneath the square root symbol. And that's that. Square root of 3 times the square root of 2 is root 6. Similarly, I can do the square root of 8 divided by the square root of 2. Since they're both underneath square root symbols, I can divide 8 by 2 and get 4. That stays underneath the square root symbol. And the nice thing I can do for this example is the square root of 4. We know that to be 2, and that's as simple as I get. So when it becomes a little bit tricky, multiplying and dividing square roots is when we have numbers that are outside of the square root multiplied or divided. So here, 2 root 5. This is actually 2 times root 5. I can't multiply them because one's underneath the square root and one is not. And then I'm multiplying that whole thing by root 3. So what I can do is multiply the numbers that are underneath the square root. So 5 and 3 gives me 15. And that's underneath the square root. And then I multiply the numbers that are not underneath the square root. So in this case 2, and we can say there's a 1 out there, so it just stays 2. And that's as simple as we get. So I'm multiplying the things that are underneath the square root, and I'm multiplying the numbers that are outside of the square root, and then I can put them next to each other. And this is just 2 times root 15, which again, we can't do 2 times 15 here. If we do square root of 15 in our calculator, we'll get a decimal, and we're not interested in that right now. Similarly here, I can divide the things that are underneath the square root symbol. So root 6 divided by root 3 becomes root 2. And then I'll do 4 divided by 1 just gives me 4. And that's as far as I can go. So here's where you're going to hit the pause button. Pause. Give these two a try. So for the first one, I'm multiplying. I want to multiply the numbers underneath the square root. So 2 and 3. That gives me 6. And then I'll multiply the numbers that are not underneath the square root. 2 and 4 gives me 8. Here, I'll divide the numbers underneath the square roots. So 10 divided by 5 gives me 2. And I can divide the numbers not underneath the square roots. 4 divided by 2 gives me 2. So the next kind of idea we need to talk about with square roots is rationalizing denominators. Now we've talked about this when we did our special right triangles lesson. We had a conversation about this in class. It's important enough to know that we're going to talk about it again here. We don't like to have square root symbols in a denominator. I can't divide 12 by square root of 3 because one's not underneath the square root symbol and one of them is. So I need to have a way to get rid of the square root of 3 and get it out of the denominator, and then we will be happy with how it looks. And that's called rationalizing. Square roots are not rational numbers, so we want to have rational numbers in the denominator. So the way I do that is simply by multiplying the bottom of this fraction by this very same square root, and I'll multiply the top of the fraction by the very same square root. So when I multiply 12 times root 3, remember from previous pages here, I can't multiply the 12 and the 3, so I just write them next to each other. That's 12 times root 3. Root 3 times root 3 becomes root 9. And then hopefully we can recall from previous math classes, the square root of 9 is just 3. And then I can do one more step to simplify this further. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So this 12 divided by root 3, when we rationalize it, becomes 4 root 3. Let's do another example here. I have 5 divided by root 2. I want the root 2 out of the denominator, so I'm going to multiply the bottom by root 2 as well as the top. 5 times root 2 just looks like 5 root 2. And then root 2 times root 2 is root 4. We know the square root of 4 is 2. And then 5 divided by 2 doesn't give us a nice, neat whole number, so we can leave the final answer, 5 root 2 over 2. So hit the pause button, give this one a shot, rationalize this fraction, and then press play and we'll talk about it. So I'm going to multiply the bottom of this fraction by root 5 and the top by root 5. So on top I get 10 root 5. On the bottom I get root 25. And hopefully you know that square root of 25 is just 5. And I can go one step further here to simplify. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So my final simplified, rationalized value is 2 root 5. So I've got 3 problems for you to do. I need you to do them. In the first one, I want you to multiply those two. In the second one, I want you to divide. And in the third one, you're going to do what we just did, which is rationalize that thing, get rid of the square root out of the denominator. Use your examples that we did to help you, and I'll answer any questions in class, and we'll continue on with special right triangles.